And at long last, we finally talk about Sonic. There really isn't another game series as polarizing and divisive as this one. From its obnoxious and at times disgusting fanbase, to the overzealous hatred the series receives from nerds with terrible opinions. The entire thing is just like an Ouroboros of spurgery. But as you could probably imagine, anything that warrants this amount of online discussion, let alone with this amount of piss and vinegar, is probably something that's earned it one way or another. And as this relates to the fetish-friendly hedgehog, Sonic has been a staple of gaming culture and influence since his debut on the Genesis. And despite all the hate, mockery, and vitriol spewed about the series over the years, his popularity has really only continued to stay steady and even grown quite a bit in recent times due to the movies, as well as the fantastic breath of life given to the series via Mania and Frontiers. Though, as is common knowledge by now, the series incurred a deep abyssal era of bad games with an increasing loss of identity and lack of a real voice, all while the aesthetics, gameplay staples, and especially the music fell to the wayside. And while people typically think all Sonic is about is going fast and eating ass, it's not as simple as that, and I think a large part of it lies within one of the most beloved yet undersung elements of the series, and that's its music. Whether it be the beautiful work of Nakamura and his 16-bit funk, Crush 40 in their cheesy boomer glory, or the elusive influence of Michael Jackson, the identity and voice of the series has always laid within its music and sound design. So let's just cut the introductions and get to brass tacks here, and let's talk about the true voice of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh yeah! This is happening!
When it came to the first game, Sega really wanted to create a unique identity for their budding mascot that they had on their hands, so getting the right person for the job would be incredibly important. And if there's anything to truly commend the original Sonic the Hedgehog for, it's that the entire thing bleeds identity. There isn't one singular element that makes the game as good as it is, and without everything in place, it's doubtful Sonic would go on to be as iconic as he is. If you ask someone just what makes the original game, or hell, the Genesis era of Sonic so special, the average answer you'll get is the fast-paced gameplay and character design. If you ask someone a bit more nerdy, they'll maybe bring up the level design, and while all these elements are important, the true answer is that it's the whole package put together. Sonic's design and even his supporting cast are drawn in a way that was destined to be iconic. They're sleek and cool in that really 90s sort of way, while also maintaining a familiarity with other cartoon-style characters of this time, honestly sharing a lot in common with the design choices for, let's say Disney's Mickey Mouse, or even the Looney Tunes characters. Pair that with the brilliant level design that allows you to make your way through different paths and get through levels, much faster and speed-based gameplay that was unlike anything else that era, and you have something that's destined to break the mold on your hands. But to bring it to the next level, we have the music. The music of the first two mainline games in the series were written and produced by Masato Nakamura, an at-the-time newcomer to the music industry and a member of the band Dreams Come True, a Japanese city pop duo who was up and coming at the time. When approached, Nakamura was initially very hesitant due to his lack of experience with computer composition, though he would ultimately take the gig. And this funky pop-focused songwriting would be the core element that would come to define the original Sonic trilogy's sound. Almost every one of the game's zones had an earworm track behind them that gets stuck in your head. Nothing captures this better than the overplayed Green Hill Zone. Not only was it iconic for the level itself, but a massive part of its appeal, even 30 years later, is the music. It might not be the theme song on the title screen, but it might as well be the theme for the series because it's possibly the most iconic song of this game. And this is all due to the fact that it's fast-paced and carries a bright and fun tone, matching perfectly with the world and characters we see on screen. Now, something really important to bring up since we're talking about the Genesis is just how much different Sonic's OST is from most other games on this platform. The Sega Genesis had a unique and one-of-a-kind sound chip, and by unique and one-of-a-kind, I mean it was kinda shit. Now, before you get your pitchforks out, there are plenty of games with great soundtracks on the Genesis, yada yada, but for every good one, there was another that sounded a lot like this. The Genesis sound chip was known for being pretty scuffed and grungy with a distorted sound, and I mean, that can sound really good if you know what to do with it, but can easily just sound like a fucking mess. And Sonic's music really avoids all of that. It might have some moments like this, but overall it carries a far more clear and coherent sound than many of the other games on the Genesis did. And it really did give it a distinct identity from the other titles that can be found on the system. On top of that, there was a decent bit of variety on the soundtrack as well, each matching perfectly with the zones they were paired with. When I composed the music for Sonic the Hedgehog 1 as well as 2, I tried to write a soundtrack for the movie. I imagined the game like a movie.
I didn't treat Sonic as a game, but a film. Because it has a very strong story, so I wanted to create a movie music or film music.
Nakamura wrote the soundtrack to both the first and second games without any gameplay, due to doing so very early on in development for both. This would have been an incredibly tall task to take on, especially in regards to the first game because you don't really have a tangible reference to exactly what it is you're trying to compose for. So he used the concept art of the game and from there created pieces of music to fit with the different characters and levels. In a way, it really freed him from trying to capture the mood of the gameplay that most soundtracks did at the time. And rather, he was able to focus on making music that fit the world of the game itself. And this did wonders to add immersion and really bring the game to life.
My inspiration comes from each graphic, each stages. So if I can see a red color, my music's gonna be like a volcano stuff. Or if I can see ice, I wanted to create a kind of icy music. At the same time, the Mega Drive sound system is very limited. Maybe we could use 4 sound or at the same time. That limitation, inspired me a lot.
Nakamura would more or less take the same approach to scoring the sequel. Much like the game itself, it felt like more of a mature and refined evolution of what the first game offered, building up the foundation that was laid. And while Sonic 2 tends to get overshadowed by its predecessor and monster of a follow-up, it's a game that should never be scoffed at, especially when it comes to the music. Chemical Plant Zone is this mess of pipes, liquids, and odd mechanisms, and the funky, bouncy music that accompanies it perfectly fits the colorful world. Its chord progression, while fun, still holds quite a bit of tension to it, and the round, rubber nature of its bass line seamlessly fits the vibrant yet dangerous environment Sonic is platforming through. Mystic Cave Zone is similar in this, where the level itself is this dark cavern still filled to the brim with the game's iconically bright art, and the music reflects it by carrying a whimsical and fun aura to it, while also playing this downscale that keeps the intensity up, all while never losing the fun and lighthearted identity of the series. It all comes together to reinforce that 90s cool vibe of the Genesis itself, and it's still upbeat and fun, though it's also a little grungier and more mature than some of the hokey and sweet songs to be found in the Mario games at the time. It's this fantastic use of music to convey atmosphere and tone through a pop-focused angle that would ultimately catch the eye of a certain king of pop. And one of the most enigmatic soundtracks of the 90s would come to be. Michael Jackson was surprisingly a big fan of both Sonic and Sega, and thanks to the working relationship the two had after creating the ironic masterpiece that is Moonwalker, Sega would reach out and offer the Neverland Rancher the job of composing the soundtrack to the third entry and first double LP, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Now, this has been one of those he said, she said rumors for around nearly 3 decades, though a few years ago, both Michael Jackson's old composer and producer Brad Bruxer, as well as Yuji Naka himself, confirmed the majority of the work was done by good old MJ. Though due to some disagreements and disappointments, the collaboration was unacknowledged. Regardless, you can hear that Thriller influence all over this game. Marble Garden Zone straight up sounds like something Michael Jackson would be singing over, with even its more subtle fills and chord shifts having his fingerprints all over it. And Launch Base Zone is no different. A few different composers were known to have worked on this game, including Jun Sano, who would become an integral figure for the series in just a few short years, but we'll get to that later. Overall, much like the previous games, the music would continue to break boundaries of what was previously conceived as video game music, and become more conventional and listenable outside of the game, all while maintaining and further developing the identity of the franchise. All 3 of these games would use their music to bolster the feel, vibe, and overall image for the Sonic series. Without the music, I really highly doubt Sonic would have taken off and become as popular or groundbreaking as he was in his heyday. And unlike the steep downfall that we would see in the early 2000s, Sonic's first era of uncertainty with lower quality entries would be able to skirt by relatively unscathed, all thanks to the iconic voice of the series carrying it along. While the average person thinks the dark era of Sonic came after the travesty of Sonic 06, or if you're a nerd with bad opinions, all of the 3D titles for that matter, the truth is there was a dark era that came long before any of that, and that's the long period of spin-off titles that came between 3 and Knuckles and the first adventure game. While many of the better offerings from this era tend to overshadow the lesser ones, that's not to say we didn't have our fair share of garbage. But if I had to really cut to brass tacks, the reason why I think these games tend to be given more leeway and seen in a more positive light is mostly due to the fact that, unlike their later games, the identity is still there, with both its graphics and its music. I mean, just look at Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. It's just a subpar Puya Puya spin-off game centered around Eggman, and it's honestly just kind of shovelware for the Genesis, but due to its charming aesthetic, it feels right at home with the series. The music does a lot of heavy lifting here too. I mean, the game's theme song alone sets the stage perfectly, and it really helps build the character of Robotnik up extremely well. It's this poppy industrial style music that really wouldn't sound too out of place on a revolting Cox record, and it matches up perfectly with the theme of playing as a crazy scientist who turns animals into robot slaves, or whatever the original incarnation of Eggman was supposed to be. And even Tails Adventure, a Game Gear game with a cheesy 8-bit soundtrack, does a lot to build up his character as well. The gameplay and art style are much more disconnected than anything we would really expect from Sonic up to the point of this game's release. Actually fits really well with Tails. I mean, he is the child character of the roster, so having a more whimsical soundtrack reminiscent of something that you would hear in the NES really adds to the feeling of playing as an adventurous kid. Now to talk about one of the first real flops of the franchise, even Knuckles Chaotix, which was a complete failure at the time, contains a more laid-back sound compared to the other games, and it still maintains the iconic Genesis Sonic vibe, and it fits perfectly with the world it backdrops, and honestly acts as one of the only saving graces for this game, and is one of the only fondly remembered aspects of this game. What I'm getting at here is that even outside of the mainline series, these more experimental spin-offs that try different forms of gameplay still use their music to not only maintain the series' identity, but also expand on the personality and background of the characters. This was all in the mid-90s, mind you, and most games, especially platformers, had some of the most bare-bones stories and little to no dialogue at all. So visual and auditory storytelling was about as deep as you're going to get. Whether purposeful or not, the music always stayed consistent, and not only being a high point of the franchise, but also an integral point in building the world and identity that the series was known for. More than any other element, the selling point of Sonic wasn't its art, it wasn't its gameplay, and it wasn't even the music we're talking about. It was everything put together, like I said in the previous section. And I don't think it's any stretch or controversial statement to say that the Sonic series was a brand in and of itself, and a larger-than-life one at that. And more than anything, the true voice of the series, especially during its time with no real dialogue or voice acting or anything, was the music. And I know it sounds cheesy or lame to say that, but seriously, mute any of these spin-off games, and while some of them might still be decent, without the music and sound design, the magic kinda just disappears, and they feel much more flat and generic. Look, let's just test it out. Yeah, that's some riveting gameplay right there. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to make here. Music is an often overlooked aspect in games, but I mean, even a modern example of this would be the Doom reboot. Doom 2016 would obviously still be a fun game if it was silent, but the adrenaline-pumping, brutal experience of ripping and tearing just wouldn't have the same identity or be nearly as fun without Mick Gordon's soundtrack behind it fueling the entire thing. And in the case of Sonic, I don't think there's anything that can prove my point even more so than one of its most iconic pieces of theme music.
Can you see the sun is shining on me? It makes me feel so free, so alive.
Ironic or not, Can You Feel the Sunshine is one of the most famous and iconic songs connected to the franchise, even if the game it's paired with is a legendary piece of dog shit. Look, Sonic R is a bad fucking game. It plays like shit, it looks like shit, and it botches what should be the easiest concept for a spin-off game about a speedy character. But in reality, it's only got one saving grace, and that's the oddly catchy and infectious soundtrack it's paired with. The music was composed by Richard Jacques, a British composer who had the misfortune of working on 2 crappy Sonic games before being allowed to help out with tracks for Jet Set Radio. His style is a bit varied across the work he's put out, but for Sonic R, it mostly takes on a primitive fusion of R&B and techno.
Take me back in time to another world. Then you can be.
A lot like the Blue Hedgehog himself, the music is so 90s that it hurts. And it's probably the farthest any of the OSTs have gone from what could be heard in the original games. Yet against all odds, it really fits the bill super well. It maintains the pop-centric nature of the rest of the series, and meshes well with the chill atmosphere R is going for. Now, I guess to tie all this up before we move on, what I'm really trying to get at here is that in the original trilogy of the Genesis games, the music worked to create a tangible and auditory identity for the franchise. It not only fit well with the world it was paired with, but separated itself from everything else that was out at the time. And when it came to the spin-offs, the music continued to be a mainstay of quality, even in its lesser offerings, continually building up the world and in many cases the other characters, and bringing more life and vibrance to the entire franchise. Speaking for characters who mostly were only able to communicate in their fourth wall breaking glances and the occasional primitive cutscene, allowing for the alluring nature of the series to stay pervasive even during its first wave of lower quality and at times outright terrible games. But this is also where the classic era of the series would come to an end, as a new era with a new identity was about to be born. The Dreamcast was the last hurrah of Sega as a top dog in the gaming industry, although in many ways it served as a bit of a rebirth for the brand. The console saw many old faces make a return and some new ones pop up as well, and it allowed for Sega to fully bring themselves into the 3D space without a lot of the limitations and oddities that the Saturn brought with it. And after failing to bring a mainline Sonic title to the Saturn, it meant that they had a lot to prove with his Dreamcast debut, and prove it they did. While there are a fair amount of people who like to envision the adventure games as bad because some cringy YouTuber played the broken DX ports and whined about the camera, they're still great games and they hold up decently well, with most of the jank in them being a product of the time. Now, that's not to say they're perfect by any means, but they're still fun experiences that are well worth your time. And I'm sure you can probably guess by the nature of this video, a lot of that was due to the fantastic soundtrack that accompanied both of these games. Adventure 1 was a bit of a rebirth and restart to the entire series. Not only was it the first true 3D mainline game in the franchise, it was also the first time we really got to hear these characters voiced, and realized in a much more high-res format. Sonic had a literal voice now, and his world was much more interactive and tangible. So rather than continue the same Saturday morning cartoon format of the Genesis games, this felt much more like an edgy teen anime full of spunk and too cool for school attitude that aged like the finest milk, with quirky one-liners and ridiculous story beats hit without a shred of irony. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. There's a charm to this take on the franchise, and while it'd be easy for all this to fall apart, it's the music brought by Crush 40 that ties this whole thing together. Crush 40 is a duo consisting of singer Johnny Gioeli and multi-instrumentalist Jen Sano, the same one who contributed to Sonic 3's score, as well as the main producer behind both the adventure game's non-Crush 40 songs. Along with the new look came a new sound, this time being high-energy rock and metal songs, as well as some more electronic stuff and atmospheric tracks to fill in when the guitar-oriented sound wouldn't do the trick. Now, before we go any further, there is a pretty big elephant in the room that I haven't really brought up yet, and that would be Sonic CD came out during the golden age of the Genesis era, and was the flagship title for the Sega CD. While overall it plays similar to the other mainline games at the time, its music and graphics were a bit of a departure. Still similar enough to feel at home, but there was a definite anime influence to the art, and with the music, well... It was where the rock influence originally started to seep in. And on the same note, it was also where we would hear some of the more contemporary electronic tracks as well. These sounds were what was taken and evolved into the sound that came to define the franchise even to this day. With Crush 40's boomer rock appeal and fast-paced electronic music, and the more atmospheric stuff I don't really know how to describe that sounds like this. Adventure 1 is far from a perfect transition to 3D, but what it delivered was a high energy and fun experience, brimming with cool aesthetics and great music. It eschewed many of the classic cartoon elements of the character design in favor of a more late 90s anime approach, and the cheesy voice acting only really added to this.
Look, it's a giant talking egg.
Silence! I am Dr. Robotnik, the greatest scientific genius in the world!
Whatever you say, Eggman.
And as you can hear, the music being this admittedly cheesy cross of hard rock and electronica really tied the whole thing together. It was like lightning in a bottle and fit the new direction of the franchise perfectly, giving the more action-based sections a boost in their energy and tone, while allowing the more laid-back tracks to really shape the vibe of the more hub-based areas that you could explore in the game. And this wasn't just a happy accident either. Sonic Team knew just how integral the use of music was to the franchise, and like with the spin-off games, would use different genres to backdrop the levels you played as different characters in, with different gameplay styles to accentuate the characters you were playing as. Though this is something that would be expanded on in a much more effective way in the sequel. Gen's direction with the music is one of the most key aspects as to why the adventure games are remembered so fondly. Now, just as with the Genesis games, Adventure 2 would feel like a complete evolution of its predecessor, taking the same approaches to the music as before, but expanding it even further. Obviously, with these games, the Crush 40 anthems are what's most remembered, but there's a reason why Pumpkin Hill Zone is as beloved as it is. It just feels right to have that more hip-hop focused sound on a character like Knuckles, as well as the more jazz-oriented stuff that plays as a backdrop for Rouge. And when you take a step back and look at the adventure games, especially 2, they're incredibly ridiculous and super cheesy. The stories are way too over-serious for a silly game about a fast hedgehog and evil scientist. It's so easy to see just how dumb all of this can be, but with some great music behind it and the right aesthetics, it allows the games to transcend beyond the cringe and beyond the ridiculous premise that they stem from and become fantastic experiences, as well as time capsules of an era long past. When the timeless classic Live and Learn starts playing while you fight against a humanity-destroying monster in space, it really puts into perspective that the game you're playing isn't meant to be taken seriously, and is instead just a fun and over-the-top experience, such the likes of Dragon Ball Z or even One Punch Man. Now, this would be toned down quite a bit with the series' next entry. While Heroes still holds up a lot of the style and sound of the adventure games, it was a bit of a step to return to form in a way. The story this time around was far less serious, and the overall aesthetics of the levels were a return to the more cartoony atmosphere of the past. Essentially, Heroes existed in this middle ground, and its gameplay more or less did the same thing. And with this came an equally lighthearted soundtrack. But just as before, Gen and Crush 40 killed it. The more funky sound of before made its grand return, now fusing with the rock-oriented sound synonymous with the series. As I mentioned about the spin-off titles, even though the aesthetics and sound were a lot different from before, they still held up the identity that was consistent with the series, and is more or less one of the reasons I think Heroes is as fondly remembered as it is. And it's something that can also be said about Heroes follow-up, even if it's one of the worst stains of gaming history.
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald? Isn't that Tails?
Shadow the Hedgehog is one of the worst games that you could ever play. It's an atrocious mess of bad level design, unplayable game mechanics, and some of the most cringe-inducing writing even for the Sonic series.
I know you, Shadow the Hedgehog. You killed everyone I loved. My family, Maria. I've been waiting all my life for this day.
Though, as with previous titles, it had one saving grace, and that was the music. More metal-oriented this time around, but never delving too far from the series' roots. Like I said, it's one of the few saving graces here. Admittedly though, it was the first time the music really started to feel a bit alien. It's still some good stuff, but you can tell at times that the direction was becoming a bit aimless. Although it's arguably fitting considering the gunplay is absolutely aimless as well. But regardless, the main problem here is the complete lack of any real identity. It wanted to be taken super serious while having the dumbest plot that we've seen yet. It wanted to be an edgy game with guns and swearing, while you played as an anthropomorphic hedgehog from a series about a character that runs fast and fights against a fat scientist who turns animals into robots. It's just not good. It's bad, it has no real identity that fits with anything that's come before and even after, and overall is just a complete mess. As much as this game lost the plot though, it would still pale in comparison of what was coming in the future. And the worst part about this is that as the credits rolled for this awful game, so did the era of Crush 40. Come the 7th generation, 2006 would mark possibly the most integral year in the franchise's history. A reboot built on tons of hype would be unleashed onto the world, and the entire landscape of gaming would change. Sonic 06 is infamous. It needs no real delving into, and there are already hundreds of videos and articles digging, lampooning, shaming, pulling apart, and leaving absolutely no stone unturned when it comes to exhausting all the details as to why this game is a steaming pile of garbage. From its glitchy gameplay, its human on furry romance elements, and the convoluted and try-hard story, we all know what this game is about. Though there is one aspect that tends to be left alone and I think deserves some more delving into. And yeah, you guessed it, it's the music. The title track really hits the nail on the head as to why the music here falls short. It's not outright bad, and in fact it's not bad at all. It's just uninspired and kind of boring. That's not to say it doesn't have its moments where it stands out, but overall, a majority of the soundtrack to this game feels as if it's trying to emulate the past, doing its best to wear the skin of its predecessors while only ever feeling like a pale imitation. The only original elements that are brought to this game are the cheesy and over-the-top symphonic tracks, and they really do little to add anything interesting and more often than not just sound out of place. It all just sounds like something that you would really expect to hear in a JRPG, which is kind of funny since this game's cinematics are gunning after that 90s Square Enix style. And in a weird way, the music of Sonic 06 mirrors the game itself as well, serving as a lesser version of what came before, and its new elements only really being an uninspired mess. And I think it says a lot that the only real contributions that feel fully there are the Crush 40 ones.
Nothing can stop you now. No ghost to bring you down. There's nothing left to lose.
Needless to say, Sonic 06 would cause a lot of damage to the overall credibility of the brand. But what's more important here is the fact that it was the first real title to show that the franchise was beginning to lose sight of its own identity. And with both Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06 coming back to back, that's two terrible games with horrible stories and an increasing loss of identity just paired together. So a lot of people who were big fans of the series really began to lose faith in it. And while I am someone who will argue that most of the games that followed 06 weren't all that bad, and outside of the select few that were genuinely just shit, they were mostly decent but had some glaring flaws that people would over-focus on to justify the scorn that they had for the series. I think what more than anything really did the most damage is that after Sonic 06, the entire series just lost its sense of identity. I mean, you had the terrible Wii games, Unleashed with its stupid werehog, something that's so glaringly dumb that it almost feels like a self-parody. You had Lost Worlds and its slower, more Mario-style gameplay, as well as all the other Boost games, and each one was met with varying degrees of success and ridicule. The only real common thread among all these games was the characters who were inside them, and even then it was a bit of a revolving cast, and just overall the entire series had no groundwork anymore. It had nothing that really brought everything together. And before you ask, no, I'm not about to say that some decent music would fix a game like Sonic 06. I do think it would do something to really boost Lost World's appeal, which is a competent and fairly decent game and probably would have had the same treatment of 3D Blast if it was consistent with the series. And while Colors does have a lot of fans and is a game that isn't as attacked as others, it still falls short because it's missing that DNA that made the series what it was. And without any sort of connective tissue within the music or aesthetics, it's just lost. Good music that fits in line with the series and acts as a glue to stick everything together is a massive reason the spotty and outright bad games of the 90s don't share the same infamy and hatred as the modern titles do. Now, obviously, with the voice acting and greater emphasis on story, music isn't going to be like it was in the past, but having the right atmosphere and tone to carry things along would probably have done well to keep the iconic and popular identity of the series alive. The best way to really make my point here is with Nintendo. The quality between each game and their long-running franchises tend to be a bit spotty, but if anything, they always know that keeping a certain consistency with the music, even between gameplay changes, art style shifts, storylines, and everything else that's shifted and changed over the years, is one of the keys in keeping these long-running franchises alive and well. Regardless of the art style, if a game looks like Zelda, it sounds like Zelda, then it's a Zelda game, even if it's a more obtuse and lower quality release, which is something that can't really be said about the Sonic series. And during its dark age, Sonic just had too many issues, and without maintaining a lot of what made it iconic to begin with, it no longer mattered. And by no means am I going to sit here and say these games all have bad music, because outside of a select few, the soundtracks did remain one of the only real redeeming qualities to them. It's just that they had no identity, and outside of maybe some of the theme songs, it all just felt like music that could be thrown into any other fast-paced platformer. Gone was the iconic music that felt one of a kind, where the instant you heard it, you knew what series it belonged to. Needless to say, the voice was gone. And just when all hope was lost, In 2017, a little anniversary game titled Sonic Mania would hit the shelves. And with it would come a mass amount of fan resurgence praising the game for recapturing the lost magic of the series. The gameplay was tight and fast-paced, with graphics that, while reimagined, felt truly faithful to the original, more cartoonish look of the original games. And this would even stem with the reimagined music. And if this wasn't good enough, this same approach was taken with some new songs composed for it as well. The music in general would just be extremely faithful to the original tone of Nakamura's early works, while sounding modern and clean, but never losing any of the qualities that made the music what it was. While again, much like the previous games, not just being bad or having negative reception due to the music, Mania was praised for far more than just its OST, because the whole thing was a return of the identity that the entire series had lost at this point, and as well as breathing life and return to form to Sonic as a whole. But just like the classics, the music played the large part here in once again returning the elements that were lost in its tone and overall atmosphere. Something that would become way more realized in just a few months when Sega would put out Mania's follow-up Sonic Forces and once again drop the ball. Forces was a mediocre game just like many of its predecessors, but coming out right after Mania was just a massive slap in the face. It was once again a large loss of identity, and it's almost ironic in this case because the game itself is very desperately trying to appeal to its fan base, especially the side that likes to indulge in self-insert characters in OC. This is a game where you could play as Sonichu or even create your own Cold Steel the Hedgehog if your heart so desired. But along with this mediocre game with a really stupid gimmick came yet another mediocre soundtrack. This time focusing on just being a boring set of orchestral tracks that sound so far away from any sort of Sonic music that's come before, and much closer to the cringe-inducing Two Steps from Hell compilations popular among weebs and DeviantArt edgelords. The whole thing should have been very surreal for Sega because they got to see how much people absolutely loved the return to form with Mania was, as well as see just how much people hated the direction the series went with the boring boost gameplay and lack of any real identity or any of that voice that the series previously had. And the music speaks for itself because, at least with a game that's different from the standard take on the gameplay like half the stages in both adventure games, it proves that even when you're playing a slow character that slowly climbs up mountains and digs for emerald shards, it can still feel like a Sonic game. And with what came next, I think it just proves the entire point. Sonic Frontiers is a game that's also guilty for breaking conventional standards of what is expected and desired from the series, but where I think it really succeeds is in how it really goes back to the same philosophy that Sonic Team had when making the adventure games. It both spends a lot of time pushing things forward in new directions, as well as playing into a lot of fan service and maintaining that classic identity. And one of the biggest focuses of the game is actually finding discs that have music from almost all the various titles in the franchise, allowing you to put whatever track you want on to listen to while you explore, and actively uses the music not just as a backdrop, but as a center point in the entire game and as a collectible to uncover. It acknowledges not only the importance of the music to the series, but also just how much people really loved it. And the new tracks, Original Frontiers, are also a bit of a return to form. I guess to really sum up what is a way too long and convoluted video about what really is just a stupid series of games that's been a laughingstock to the industry since even I was a kid, is that Sonic's music is pretty damn good. And if there's any other real takeaway here besides the fact that I'm just some cringy Sonic fan too, it's that the true voice is the music that carries the entire series along and acts as the glue keeping each element together. But with all that being said, and a overly long run time for a premise like this, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.